My husband cut up my credit card after flaunting his affair with my stepsister. Be a good silent wife or leave with nothing, he sneered. That night, I sent one email. By morning, his cards were declined. He never knew the millions were mine all along. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. My name is Eleanor, and, well, I need to tell you what happened. I feel like if I don't let this story out, it will just stay coiled up inside me forever. I need to get this off my chest, and I have a feeling some of you out there might understand. You might have seen a piece of your own life in mine, a reflection in this story I'm about to tell. Before I tell you what my husband, Preston, did to me on that cold Tuesday night, the night he humiliated me in a way I never thought possible, a way that ripped the very fabric of my world apart. I need you to understand the world I was living in. It was a beautiful, shimmering lie, and for 12 long years, I was its most willing participant. We lived on the 58th floor of a glass tower in Chicago, a place the real estate agent had called a palace in the sky. From our floor-to-ceiling windows, the city looked like a carpet of diamonds at night, and during the day, Lake Michigan stretched out like a calm, blue eternity. It was beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty you see in a magazine, perfect, untouchable, and cold. To the world, we were the perfect couple. Preston Vance, the charismatic, wildly successful entrepreneur, the man with the Midas touch. And me, his quiet, devoted wife, Eleanor. He was the sun, a blazing star of ambition and charm, and everyone, our friends, his business partners, even my own family, revolved around him in a dizzying orbit. I wasn't even a planet. I was just a shadow he cast, long and faint, disappearing completely when the light hit him just right. Preston had built this narrative so carefully, brick by brick, lie by lie. The story, the one he told at cocktail parties and charity galas, was that he was a self-made man, a financial genius who had clawed his way to the top from nothing. He had created this life, this palace in the sky, and had graciously allowed me to live in it. It was a good story, filled with struggle and triumph. The only problem was that every single word of it was false. The truth was much simpler, and so much crueler. Preston had never earned a real dollar in his life. Our entire fortune, every stock, every bond, every piece of real estate, every penny of it, came from me. You see, years before I met him, I was a different woman. I was Eleanor Jenkins. I was a programmer back in the early days of the dot-com boom. I wasn't just a coder, I was an investor. I had a good head for numbers and an even better gut for potential. My parents had left me a small inheritance, nothing life-changing, but enough to get started. I took that seed money and, through a combination of late nights, endless research, and a little bit of luck, I got in on the ground floor of a tech startup. When it took off, it didn't just fly, it went stratospheric. I built a portfolio with patience and passion. I was proud of it. I was proud of myself. But managing that kind of money, it was a constant, heavy pressure. It was a full-time job on top of my actual job. I was tired. Then I met Preston at a friend's wedding. He was magnetic. He had this way of looking at you, of really listening, that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He wasn't intimidated by my success, he said he was in awe of it. He celebrated it. He made me feel seen. Early in our relationship, his interest in my finances seemed like an act of profound love and protection. I remember one night, we were sitting in my much smaller, cozier apartment back then. I was stressed, hunched over my laptop, tracking the market. He came up behind me and started rubbing my shoulders. "Let me handle this, Eleanor," he'd said, his voice smooth as velvet. "You've worked so hard. You've built an empire. Now let me be the one to guard its walls. You shouldn't have to stress about this stuff. Let me take the burden." I leaned back into his touch, my eyes closing. The idea of letting go, of sharing that weight, was the most seductive thing I had ever heard. I was so in love, so tired of the pressure, that I let him. I thought we were building a partnership, a team. Slowly, so slowly I barely noticed, he took control. It started with him being added as an authorized user. Then he suggested consolidating accounts for efficiency. He set up meetings with new accountants, his accountants. He put the accounts in his name as the administrator, for tax purposes, he said. He gave me limited access, telling me it was to simplify things for me. He rewrote our history until my own story was completely erased. He became the star of a success story I had written and financed. Our home, which once felt like a sanctuary, transformed into a museum of his ego. Every piece of art, every Italian sofa, was a trophy he displayed as proof of his brilliance. I'd often watch him, pacing the living room with a glass of expensive whiskey in hand, admiring his achievements. And I'd sit there, on a couch I paid for, feeling like just another one of his decorative objects. Functional, but voiceless. The ultimate symbol of my supposed dependence was a secondary credit card he allowed me to use. It was in his name, and he'd load a monthly allowance onto it for me. An allowance. From my own money. Be careful what you spend, my love, he'd say with that condescending smile, while polishing the Rolex I'd bought him to celebrate a deal I had funded. He called it my fun money. It was a symbolic leash, a constant, humiliating reminder that in the world he had created, I was nothing without him. And for 12 years, I believed him. I let my own identity shrink until it was small enough to fit in his pocket. But a cage, even a gilded one, is still a cage. And I was about to be reminded of just how cold and sharp the bars really were. It wasn't one big earthquake that shattered my delusion. It was a series of small, barely perceptible tremors, the kind that weaken a foundation over time until the whole structure is ready to collapse. It was 1,000 little cuts, 1,000 moments of being made to feel small, invisible, and foolish. We'd be at a dinner party at someone's home, surrounded by people who hung on Preston's every word. These were successful people, doctors, lawyers, other business owners. Someone would ask a question about the market, about a new tech trend. I'd start to answer, after all, it was my field, the source of our entire life. I'd say something like, well, the interesting thing about that new platform is the way they're leveraging user data. And before I could finish, Preston would cut me off with a loud, jovial laugh. Oh, Eleanor, he'd say, patting my hand as if I were a child who had just recited a nursery rhyme. Don't you worry your pretty little head about all that boring stuff. Let the men talk business. Now, tell Susan about that new gallery you found. And everyone would chuckle, charmed by his protective, old-fashioned gallantry. The conversation would move on, leaving me sitting there, my face burning, my words caught in my throat. He did it so smoothly that it looked like affection. But it was control. It was erasure. He took credit for everything, big and small. I remember spending weeks choosing the perfect shade of gray for our living room walls, a specific color called Silent Dawn. I sourced a painting from a local artist I loved, a beautiful, abstract landscape that reminded me of the coasts of Maine. A week later, our friends David and Martha came over. Preston, the apartment looks incredible. Martha had gushed. You have such an amazing eye for design. This color is perfect. I waited for him to correct her, to say, actually, that was all Eleanor. She has a real talent. It would have been such a small thing. But he just smiled, puffing out his chest as if he'd just won an award. Thank you, he said, gesturing around the room. I knew that painting would be perfect for that wall. It took me ages to find the right piece. I just stood in the kitchen, a tray of appetizers in my hand, listening, feeling like a ghost in my own home. The financial control was the most insidious part. It was a constant, low-grade humiliation. I had no idea about the specifics of our accounts anymore. He'd just give me vague updates, everything's great, honey. We're making a killing. If I asked to see the statements, he'd get defensive, a wounded look on his face. Are you saying you don't trust me, Eleanor? After everything I do for us? It's all very complicated, it would just bore you. It was easier to just stay quiet, to accept the peace that came with ignorance. One afternoon, I was on the phone with my sister, Karen. Her son, my nephew Michael, a sweet, hardworking kid, had just gotten into his local community college. Karen was a single mom who worked 2 jobs, and she was short on the tuition payment. It wasn't a huge amount, just a few $1,000s, but it was more than I had in the small personal checking account Preston let me keep. "Don't you worry about it," I told her, my voice full of a confidence I didn't feel. "I'll take care of it. Consider it an early birthday present for Michael." After I hung up, my stomach was in knots. I had to ask Preston for the money. My own money. I found him in his home office, which he called the command center, looking at stock tickers on a giant, wall-mounted screen. "Preston," I said, trying to keep my voice light and casual. "I was just talking to Karen. I'd like to send her a little money for Michael's college fund." He didn't even look up from the screen. His focus was absolute. "How much is a little?" I told him the amount. He finally turned in his large leather chair, taking off his reading glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose with an exaggerated sigh, as if I'd brought him the world's biggest problem. "Eleanor, we've talked about this. You can't just give away money like that. We have a budget. We have financial goals." "A budget?" "Preston, it's a drop in the bucket for us. And it's my family. It all adds up," he said sternly. "Discipline is the key to wealth management. Something you were happy to let me handle, if I recall." He gestured to my purse on the chair. "You have your allowance on the card. If you want to help her, use that. Save up for a few months. Or tell her to have Michael get a student loan. That's what normal people do." He turned back to his screen, a clear dismissal. I stood there, frozen in the doorway. He was right. He had made it our money. And he had made me less than normal. I was a child asking for a handout. I walked away without another word, my heart pounding with a mixture of shame and a new, unfamiliar anger. The cracks in our perfect life were starting to look like canyons, and I was terrified of falling in. The final blow, the one that shattered the last remnants of my gilded cage, wasn't about money. It was about something far more primal, a betrayal so deep it felt like it severed my soul. It was about family. It was about my stepsister, Cassidy. Cassidy was 10 years younger than me, the daughter of my father's second wife. My dad had remarried late in life, and I'd always felt a sort of protective duty towards her. I wanted to be the good big sister, the one she could count on. When she decided to move to Chicago after college, I was thrilled. I helped her find her first apartment, co-signed the lease, and even furnished it for her. When she was struggling to find a job, I asked Preston to see if one of his contacts had an opening. He'd made a few calls and gotten her an entry-level marketing position at a friend's firm. I thought I was helping her. I was so naive it makes me sick to remember it. She started coming over for dinner once a week, then twice. At first, it was nice. It felt like having family close by, a little piece of home in the cold, impersonal city. But then, I started to notice things. Small, almost imperceptible shifts in the atmosphere when she was around. The way her hand would linger on Preston's arm a second too long when she laughed at one of his jokes. The way they shared inside jokes I wasn't a part of, exchanging quick, knowing glances over my head. The way he looked at her when he thought I wasn't watching, a predatory gleam in his eyes that I had once mistaken for affection when it was directed at me. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was Cassidy, the little girl I used to help with her homework. And this was Preston, my husband of 12 years. I was just feeling insecure. I was imagining things. Then one evening, I came home early from a charity luncheon that had ended sooner than expected. I walked into our apartment, and the air was thick with a silence that screamed guilt. I called out their names, but there was no answer. I found them in the living room. Cassidy was sitting on our white sofa, and Preston was standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders, his fingers kneading her skin. It was too intimate. Too familiar. They sprang apart when they saw me, their faces a mixture of shock and something else, defiance. "Oh, Eleanor," Cassidy said, her voice unnervingly bright, a false, tinkling sound. "I just stopped by to drop off some paperwork for Preston from the office." Preston just nodded, a smug little smile playing on his lips that made my blood run cold. Cassidy was just leaving. The next few weeks were a living nightmare. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. He flaunted it. He became bolder, crueler. He'd bring her to dinners with our friends, introducing her as his brilliant protégé. He'd buy her gifts, a bracelet I recognized from a store I loved, a silk scarf in her favorite color. He was using my money to court my stepsister right in front of my eyes. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. Our friends could see it, I'm sure of it. I saw their pitying glances, heard their whispered conversations when I left the room. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. I was in our bedroom, trying to read, when Preston walked in, already on his cell phone. He was making plans. "Yeah, she'll be perfect for the Keys trip," he said, laughing. "She'll love the boat." I knew he wasn't talking about me. We hadn't been on a real vacation, just the two of us, in years. I knew he was talking about Cassidy. When he hung up, I confronted him. I finally found my voice, a voice I thought I had lost forever. "What was that about, Preston? Who are you taking to the Keys?" He turned to me, and there was no apology in his eyes. No remorse. Only cold, hard contempt. "What's going on, Eleanor," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "is that I'm living my life. Cassidy is fun. She's exciting. She appreciates what I do for her. Unlike some people." "What you do for her?" "With my money!" I screamed, the words tearing from my throat, raw and ragged. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over me. "You still don't get it, do you? After all these years. It's not your money anymore. It's mine. I'm the one who makes it grow. I'm the one who protects it. I'm the one who built this life. You're just living in it." He looked me up and down, a cruel sneer on his face. "So here's the deal. I'm not going to sneak around. I'm done with that. You have two choices. You can accept things as they are. You can be the quiet, supportive wife you're supposed to be, and you can continue to enjoy this beautiful apartment, the nice clothes, the easy life your friends all envy. Or, you can leave." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like poison. "But if you leave with nothing. I will not give you one single cent. I will lock you out of everything. You'll be out on the street. You seem to have forgotten how to be independent. You've forgotten your place. So, consider this your lesson in submission. Now, what's it going to be?" I just stood there, speechless, my body shaking. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted with everything I had and everything I was standing in front of me, telling me to accept his affair with my own stepsister, or be thrown away like garbage. The love I had for him died in that moment. It didn't fade away. It was murdered. And in its place, something cold and hard and sharp began to grow. Just 2 days after that ultimatum, 2 days of me walking around my own home like a zombie in a waking nightmare, Preston announced he was hosting a dinner party. Not a casual get-together. A crucial business dinner for 2 potential investors, a Mr. Holloway and a Ms. Nguyen. They were considering investing in his new venture, a tech startup he was launching. A venture, of course, that was being entirely funded by my trust, using my capital as collateral. He expected me to play the part of the gracious hostess, the perfect, adoring wife standing proudly by her brilliant husband. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. A part of me wanted to scream, to throw a vase against the wall, to refuse. A part of me wanted to pack a bag and just walk out that door. But his words echoed in my head, a chilling mantra: you leave with nothing. I had no access to my own fortune. He had made sure of that. I had no leverage, no power. I was trapped. So, I did as I was told. I went into my walk-in closet, a room filled with expensive clothes I rarely wore, and I chose my armor. A simple, elegant black dress. A string of pearls my grandmother had given me. I sat at my vanity and applied makeup with a steady hand, creating a mask of serene composure. I put on a smile that felt like it was carved from ice. I was an actress preparing for the most difficult role of my life. The evening was torture from the moment the doorbell rang. Preston was in his element, a master showman. He held court in our living room, pouring expensive wine, telling grand stories about his business acumen, his voice booming with a confidence that made my stomach turn. Holloway and Nguyen, a sharp-looking pair in their 50s, were clearly impressed. They hung on his every word. And me? I was a prop. I smiled, I nodded, I made sure their wine glasses were never empty. They'd ask me polite, meaningless questions, the kind you ask a child or a pet. How do you like the wine, Eleanor? What a lovely view you have. This is a beautiful piece of art, did Preston pick it out? They never asked what I thought of the monetization strategy for the new platform he was pitching. To them, I was just the pretty, quiet woman behind the genius. After dinner, Preston led them to the comfortable chairs by the window overlooking the glittering city. It was time for his pitch. He spoke with a passion that was almost believable, talking about algorithms and database architecture and synergistic market disruption. He was using technical terms he'd memorized from the detailed reports I had spent weeks writing for him. I had done the research, I had analyzed the data, I had written the entire business plan. He was a thief, a ventriloquist using my voice to build his legend, and I had to sit there and watch him do it. Then it happened. He was getting to the most technical part of the presentation, the part about data security. He was trying to sound impressive, to show off his deep knowledge. And he got it wrong. He said they were using a SHA-1 hashing procedure to encrypt user data. It was a small mistake, but a critical one. For anyone in the tech world, it was a massive, blaring red flag. SHA-1 was notoriously vulnerable, an outdated protocol that hadn't been considered secure for years. It was the equivalent of a builder proudly announcing he was using asbestos for insulation. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the humiliation of the past few days. Maybe it was the sight of him so arrogantly stealing my work and doing it badly. Almost as a reflex, from a part of me I thought was long dead, the sharp, intelligent woman who built this fortune in the first place, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but in the focused silence of the room, it cut through the air like a knife. We actually use SHA-256 with a per-user cryptographic salt, I said, looking directly at Ms. Nguyen, the one who seemed to have the most technical background. SHA-1 wouldn't be secure enough for the kind of data we'll be handling. The silence that followed was deafening. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Preston froze, his mouth slightly open. The investor's head snapped towards me. Ms. Nguyen's eyes, which had been full of polite admiration for Preston, now held a new spark of sharp, genuine interest. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Holloway raised an eyebrow. The power dynamic at the table had just been turned completely upside down. For one brief, glorious moment, I was no longer a ghost. I was real. I saw a flash of pure, undiluted panic in Preston's eyes. It was a micro-expression, there and gone in a heartbeat, but I saw it. It was the terror of a fraud who was about to be exposed. It was quickly replaced by a hot flash of fury, and then, just as quickly, his charming mask snapped back into place. He let out a laugh that was just a little too loud, a little too forced. He draped a heavy arm around my shoulders, his fingers digging into my skin with a strength that was almost painful. It was a gesture that looked affectionate to our guests, but to me, it felt like a warning. A threat. There she is, he boomed to the investors, his voice dripping with false bonhomie. My secret weapon. Eleanor is my personal quality control. She loves to keep me on my toes with these little technical details. She's such a tech hobbyist. A hobbyist. He reduced my career, my knowledge, my entire identity, to a hobby. In a single sentence, he had demoted me from expert to enthusiast. He did it with a smile, and the investors, wanting to defuse the awkwardness, laughed along. The tension was broken for them. But the grip on my shoulder was a clear message. You will pay for this. The rest of the dinner was agony. Preston tried twice as hard to be charismatic, telling anecdotes and promising astronomical returns. I remained silent, but my silence was different now. It was no longer submissive. It was a heavy, weighted silence, loaded with meaning. I could feel Ms. Nguyen's occasional glances, no longer condescending, but curious, evaluating. The deal that Preston had considered a sure thing now felt uncertain. He knew it. I could feel his rage bubbling just beneath the surface, a beast waiting for the apartment doors to close to be unleashed. The drive home was silent. Not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, suffocating one, filled with his unspoken rage. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were bone-white. The only sounds were the hum of the luxury engine and the incessant, maddening ticking of his Rolex, the watch I paid for. I stared out the window at the blurred city lights, feeling nothing but a strange, distant calm. The fear I usually felt in these situations, the anxious knot in my stomach, was gone. I knew a storm was coming. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared. I was ready. The second the heavy oak door of our apartment clicked shut behind us, the storm erupted. What in the hell do you think you were doing? He screamed, his voice echoing off the cold marble floors of the foyer. He ripped off his tie and threw it on a chair with such force it slid to the floor. You humiliated me. You made me look like an absolute idiot in front of them. He paced back and forth like a caged animal, his face flushed, his movements jerky. I spent months setting up that deal. Months. The deal that was going to secure our future. Our future, Eleanor. And you, with your stupid, pathetic need to be the smartest person in the room, you might have just blown it all. He advanced on me, his face twisted with a rage I had never seen up close before. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I just stood there, my hands clasped in front of me, and looked him straight in the eye. My calmness seemed to infuriate him even more. It was like pouring gasoline on a fire. You are so disconnected from reality, he spat, his voice dripping with venom. You have no idea what it takes to earn the money you spend so freely. You live in this palace, you wear these clothes that cost more than some people's salary, and you think you're entitled to an opinion. With a sudden, violent movement, he snatched my purse from my shoulder. The strap dug into my skin. He dumped its contents onto the entryway table. My keys, my phone, my lipstick, my wallet, they scattered across the polished wood with a series of sharp clatters. He ripped open the wallet and pulled out the one credit card he allowed me to use. The secondary card. The one with his name on it. He strode over to the sleek, modern desk by the window, yanked open a drawer, and took out a pair of heavy office scissors. It seems you need a lesson, he said, his voice trembling with an icy fury. A real lesson in the value of money. He held the card up between his thumb and forefinger, the light from the city catching the silver numbers. My money. And then, with two sharp, violent snaps, he cut the card into 4 pieces. Snip. Snip. The sound was shockingly loud in the silent room. The pieces of blue plastic fluttered down onto the pristine, cream-colored silk rug, landing with an almost inaudible whisper. But to me, it sounded like a building collapsing. It was the sound of my last shred of dignity being destroyed in front of me. He stood there, chest heaving, the scissors still clutched in his hand, looking at me with an expression of savage triumph. He expected me to cry. He expected me to fall to my knees and beg for forgiveness for daring to have a voice. He expected me to break. But I didn't break. I didn't even shatter. I just stood there, watching him, and the silence in the room became my weapon. It was so deep, so dense, it seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the air, leaving only his ragged breathing. I looked him right in the eye, and for the first time in 12 years, I didn't see the charming man I once loved. I saw a stranger. A frightened, petty jailer who had just used his last weapon, not realizing the prison walls, the bars, the locks, had always been mine. My utter lack of reaction seemed to unnerve him more than any tears could have. His triumphant expression faltered, replaced by confusion, then by a renewed wave of anger. "Let's see how you survive now," he sneered, trying to regain his footing, his voice dripping with contempt. "Let's see how you pay for your little lunches with your friends, or your yoga classes. You are going to learn, the hard way, that everything in this house, every luxury you enjoy, I earned with the sweat of my brow." He gestured wildly around the room, at the art I had chosen, the furniture I had paid for, the view I had secured. Every word was a lie, another thick layer of paint over a truth I had foolishly allowed him to bury. I let him talk. I let his poison fill the air until he ran out of steam, his fury sputtering out in the face of my complete, unnerving stillness. When he was finally done, a hollow echo in the vast, opulent room, I did something he didn't expect. Slowly, deliberately, I bent my knees and crouched down. My movements were not those of a defeated woman. They were fluid, graceful, without a hint of a tremor. With my fingertips, I picked up the first piece of the card from the thick fibers of the rug. The bank's logo, shattered in two. Then the second piece, with the first part of my name, Elia Dash. The third, with the last digits of the account number. And finally, the fourth. Preston watched me from above, an imposing shadow of confusion and irritation. "What are you doing?" he mocked, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. His script had called for tears and begging, and I was refusing to play my part. "You going to try and tape it back together?" I didn't answer him. I simply stood up, the 4 pieces of plastic resting in the palm of my hand. They weighed nothing, but to me, they held the weight of 12 years of condescension, of being erased, of being silenced. I looked him directly in the eye, feeling a strength I hadn't felt in a decade rise up my spine. It was a cold, hard, beautiful feeling. It felt like coming home to myself. "You're right, Preston," I told him, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was serene, clear, like it belonged to the woman I used to be before I met him. "I need to learn." He let out a short, bitter laugh. It was a sound of relief. He thought he had won. He thought my words were an admission of defeat, a promise of future submission. He tossed the scissors onto the desk with a clatter, the sound of a weapon abandoned on the battlefield. He turned and headed for the kitchen to pour himself a celebratory whiskey. For him, the show was over. The lesson had been taught. For me, it had just begun. I walked to our bedroom, my fist closed tightly around the sharp-edged fragments of my old life. I closed the door behind me, a soft click that felt as final as a slamming iron gate. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dim light of the room, the sounds of Preston clinking ice into a glass a distant noise from another world, a world I no longer belonged to. I opened my hand and looked at the 4 pieces of plastic. The keys to my cage, now broken. He thought he had taken away my power. In reality, he had just handed me the shards I needed to cut myself free. I took out my phone. For years, this device had been for receiving his instructions, for managing our shared social calendar, for confirming his dinner reservations. Tonight, it would be my weapon. And then, a memory surfaced, pushing its way through the fog of years of submission. It was a lifeline from the past, a conversation so seemingly insignificant at the time that I had almost forgotten it. It was a conversation with Mr. Albright, my family's wealth manager, a kind, meticulous man with wise eyes who had handled my finances since I was a teenager. I remembered it clearly now. We were in his quiet, wood-paneled office just a few months after my wedding. I had just instructed him to add Preston as an authorized user on my main accounts. I'd seen a flicker of something in his eyes, a professional hesitation. "Eleanor," he had said, his voice gentle but firm, with the professional tact he was known for. "It is always prudent in any financial partnership to maintain a clear chain of command. A fail-safe. Perhaps we should establish a safety protocol. Something only you, and you alone, can activate." In my love-struck blindness, I had laughed it off. "Don't worry, Mr. Albright. Preston and I are a team. There are no secrets between us." "Of course," he had replied smoothly. "But permit me to create a file anyway. We will call it Protocol 0. It will contain a set of pre-authorized instructions. All it will require is your activation. Just in case you ever change your mind." That memory, once irrelevant, was now a lighthouse in a hurricane. From the living room, I heard Preston's voice, loud and arrogant. He was on the phone, probably with one of his sycophantic friends. "Hey, Mark." "Yeah, the weekend in the Keys is on. I'm thinking we head down tomorrow afternoon." There was a pause. I could hear the smirk in his voice even through the door. "Oh, Eleanor?" "No, she's not coming. She's staying here, on a little time out. Needs to think about her attitude. She has to learn who's in charge if she wants her privileges back." Privileges. He called my own money privileges. The casual cruelty, the way he planned a luxury vacation financed by me while sentencing me to house arrest, that was it. That was the final push. The last molecule of doubt, the last vestige of the woman who had loved him, dissolved into nothing. I opened my laptop, the one he always called my little toy for passing the time. My fingers, which hadn't programmed anything serious in years, moved across the keyboard with a surprising, comforting muscle memory. I didn't go to the main banking website he had access to. I went to the secure, back-end investor portal, the one Mr. Albright had set up for me, the one Preston didn't even know existed. The core of my fortune resided there, untouched and under my exclusive control. The charts, the numbers, the performance reports, it was like looking at my own reflection after a long time and finally recognizing myself. I saw the woman who had built all of this. And I knew exactly what to do. I drafted a new email. It was short, cold, and unambiguous. It was a declaration of war disguised as a business instruction. The recipient was Arthur Albright. The subject was simple: Protocol 0. Immediate execution. In the body of the message, I wrote 3 clear, powerful sentences. Please proceed with the execution of Protocol 0 with immediate effect. Revoke all secondary user access on all accounts associated with my name, Eleanor Jenkins. Transfer all balances to contingency account 77B. Confirm when done. My finger hovered over the send button. For a single heartbeat, the world stopped. This was the abyss, the point of no return. In that moment of hesitation, I heard him laugh loudly in the living room. "You won't believe it," he was saying to his friend. She tried to correct me on a technical point in front of Holloway and Nguyen. I had to put her in her place when we got home. You know how it is. You have to remind them who wears the pants every once in a while. The contempt in his voice was the final push I needed. With a slow, deep exhale, the first real breath I'd taken in years, I clicked. The soft sound of the trackpad was almost imperceptible. But to me, it was the starting gun for a new life. The silent war was over. And I had just won. I closed the laptop with ceremonial slowness, its screen darkening like a curtain falling at the end of a painfully long play. From the living room, Preston's laughter still floated in the air, mixing with the sound of his whiskey glass. He was so immersed in his world of self-deception, so absolutely certain of his power, that he had no idea the ground beneath his feet had just disintegrated. I sat in the darkness of the room, listening to the beating of my own heart. For the first time in 12 years, it wasn't beating with fear or anxiety. It was the steady, silent beat of a war drum, calling me home to myself. Every minute that followed stretched into an eternity. I held my phone in my hand, the screen dark. I wasn't anxious. I felt a chilling calm, an absolute certainty I had never experienced before in my life. I was a strategist in her headquarters, observing the map of the battlefield, having already moved the single, decisive piece that guaranteed victory. Then, after what felt like an hour but was probably only 5 minutes, the phone vibrated softly in my hand. A new email notification lit up the screen. The sender was Mr. Albright. The subject read, Protocol 0. Immediate execution. I held my breath as I opened it. The text was brief, professional, and the most beautiful thing I had ever read. Dear Eleanor, I confirm the execution of Protocol 0 is complete. All secondary accesses under the name Preston Vance have been revoked. All funds have been consolidated into the contingency account, accessible only by you. We are at your disposal for the next steps. Sincerely, Arthur Albright. I read the words 2-3 times, letting them sink in. A wave of relief so immense, so powerful, washed over me that I had to brace myself on the bed. It was done. It was real. I was free. The power I had willingly ceded, piece by piece over 12 years, had just been reclaimed in a single, digital instant. A new energy flooded me. I was no longer a prisoner awaiting my fate. I was a woman with a plan. I stood up and moved silently, my feet making no sound on the thick carpet. I opened my walk-in closet, a cavern of designer clothes and shoes. I ignored it all. I wasn't making a scene. I wasn't a fugitive grabbing everything she could. I took a small carry-on bag from the top shelf, one I used for weekend trips before I met him. I began to pack, not with haste, but with precision. Just the essentials. A pair of jeans I hadn't worn in years. A few simple shirts. My laptop. My personal documents, passport, birth certificate, the things that proved I was Eleanor Jenkins. I left behind the designer dresses, the expensive shoes, all the costumes for the role he'd made me play. Each garment I left hanging was a tie cut with my past. I paused in front of my jewelry box, a lacquered wood box he had given me on our first anniversary. I opened it. Inside, diamond necklaces, gold bracelets, and sapphire earrings sparkled under the faint light. They were all gifts he had bought with my money to adorn his trophy wife. They were beautiful, but they felt empty, like our life together. I reached to the bottom and searched until my fingers found a simple pair of pearl earrings. My grandmother had given them to me when I graduated from college. They were the only things in that box that were truly mine. I put them on. That night, for the first time in our marriage, I locked our bedroom door. An hour later, Preston, probably drunk and feeling magnanimous, banged on it. Still mad, princess? Open up, he slurred. I didn't answer. I just sat on the bed, holding my breath. Fine, whatever, he muttered from the other side. Sleep on the couch if you want. I don't care. We'll talk about your attitude tomorrow. I heard his heavy footsteps move away, and then the sound of the TV in the living room. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I was too busy, too excited, planning the first day of the rest of my life. The sunrise painted the sky over Lake Michigan in shades of pink and orange. I got up before the sun was fully out. Preston was snoring on the living room sofa, an empty whiskey bottle on the side table beside him. The image was pathetic. I felt no pity, only a deep and final detachment. I dressed in the clothes I had prepared, put on a pair of comfortable walking shoes, and grabbed my small suitcase. My dramatic exit, the screaming match he undoubtedly expected would happen tomorrow, would never come. My revenge wouldn't be a shout. It would be a deafening, total silence. A complete absence. I took one last walk through the apartment. It was like visiting a museum dedicated to a person who no longer existed. On the kitchen island, next to the keys to his prized Mercedes, I left my wedding ring. It felt surprisingly light. Beside it, I placed a small, simple note I had written on hotel stationery. It had just 4 words on it. Lesson has been learned. I walked to the front door, my steps making no sound on the Persian rug. I carefully turned the knob, opened the door, and stepped out into the silent, carpeted hallway of the building. I pulled the heavy doors shut behind me. The sound of the deadbolt clicking into place was the most satisfying, final sound I had ever heard. I didn't look back. The stage was set. Preston would wake up in his castle, believing himself to be the king, completely unaware that his kingdom no longer existed, and that he was about to be evicted in the most public and humiliating way possible. I took a taxi to a small, discreet hotel in a quiet neighborhood on the north side, a place I knew Preston would never think to look for me. I checked in under my maiden name, Eleanor Jenkins. It felt good to say it, to write it down. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I didn't need to check my phone or worry about what he was doing. I knew Preston. His arrogance was his blindness, and it was the one thing I could always count on. I was told later, by a mutual acquaintance who heard the story from one of Preston's horrified friends who was supposed to go to the Keys with him, exactly how that morning unfolded. It was almost exactly as I had pictured it. He woke up late, around 10 o'clock, his head pounding from the whiskey. He saw my side of the bed was empty and neatly made, which was unusual. He found my note and my ring on the kitchen island. He probably scoffed, crumpling the note and tossing it in the trash can with a flick of his wrist. "She'll get over it," he muttered to himself, annoyed but not worried. In his mind, it was just a tantrum. He thought I was at a friend's house, waiting for his call, ready to come crawling back the second he offered a half-hearted apology and dangled my privileges in front of me again. The idea that I could have a plan, a will of my own beyond reacting to him, was something his mind simply couldn't conceive. He showered, put on one of his most expensive linen shirts, a pair of designer jeans, and strapped on his Rolex. It was his daily ritual, putting on the costume of the successful man. He decided to proceed with his plans for the weekend in the Keys with Cassidy and their friends, as if nothing had happened. It was his way of punishing me, of showing me my absence was insignificant. He got into the Mercedes, the engine roaring with a power he believed was his by right. His first stop was an upscale grocery store in the Gold Coast, one of those places where the cheese costs more per pound than the steak, and people don't look at prices. His plan was to buy the best cuts of dry-aged steak, several bottles of expensive Cabernet, and all sorts of artisanal cheeses to impress his friends. It was all part of the performance of being the generous host, the man of taste and means. He strolled through the aisles with his characteristic swagger, filling his cart to the brim. Every item he added was a reaffirmation of his status, a tangible proof of the life he supposedly built. He had no idea he was living his last few minutes as the man he thought he was, buying a feast for a future that no longer existed. At the checkout, the cart was overflowing, the total running into many hundreds of dollars. He greeted the young cashier by name, a confident, charming smile on his face. He was a regular here. He put the items on the conveyor belt while talking on his cell phone, confirming the arrival time with his friend. "Yeah, I'm bringing everything," he boasted into the phone. "The best of the best, as always. You know how I do it." When the cashier announced the total, he ended his call, pulled out his crocodile leather wallet, and extracted his gleaming black credit card. He slid it into the machine with a casual, dismissive gesture. He waited for the familiar, satisfying beep of approval. Instead, the small terminal screen flashed 2 words in stark red letters: "Transaction declined." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "That's weird." "Run it again," he told the cashier, his tone a little sharper. "Must be a machine error." She complied. "Declined," the screen repeated, seeming to mock him. People in the line behind him began to shift impatiently, sighing. He could feel their stares. The humiliation, the very same kind he had inflicted on me the night before, began to prickle his skin. He pulled out another card from his wallet, an American Express Platinum. "Here, try this one." The result was the same. Declined. Panic, cold and sharp, began to seep through the cracks of his carefully constructed composure. His normally tanned face went pale. "There must be a problem with the bank system," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. He had to step away from the register, leaving behind the cart overflowing with his false status. Furious and deeply ashamed, he went outside and dialed the number for the private banking line, the one with no hold times, the one that always answered instantly. "This is Preston Vance," he snapped when the advisor answered. "There's a problem with my cards. All of them. They're being rejected. I am in the middle of a very important purchase, and I need you to fix this. Now." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the polite, professional sound of a keyboard clicking. The advisor's voice returned, but the tone had changed. It was cold, formal, devoid of the usual deference he was accustomed to. "One moment, Mr. Vance. I am reviewing your profile." Preston expected an apology, a technical explanation, a promise to fix it immediately. What he received was the sound of his entire world collapsing through the earpiece of his phone. "Mr. Vance," the advisor began with cutting precision, "I see a notification here. Effective as of last night, your status as an authorized user on all accounts associated with this portfolio has been revoked." Preston gasped. "What? What are you talking about? That's impossible. Those are my accounts." He must have let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. The advisor continued, his voice as unflappable as a machine. "I'm afraid you are mistaken, sir. The sole owner and principal beneficiary of the investment fund, the checking accounts, and all associated lines of credit is Ms. Eleanor Jenkins." The name change, from Vance back to Jenkins, must have confused him for a second. It was a detail I had asked Mr. Albright to handle. Per her direct instructions, the advisor went on, his words like tiny, sharp icicles, "All secondary accesses have been eliminated, and the joint account you shared has been dissolved. The funds have been transferred to a contingency account to which only she has access." The silence that followed must have been absolute. I can just picture him, standing there on the busy Chicago street, the sounds of traffic fading into a dull roar, the phone glued to his ear, his face transforming from disbelief to panic to pure, naked terror. "The business, the cars, the apartment," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir," the advisor said with chilling finality, "according to our records, you do not own any assets in your name through our institution. All leases and properties are tied to the primary accounts owned by Ms. Jenkins. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" The self-made man was a fiction. The financial genius was a fraud. The king was naked in the middle of a grocery store, and everyone could see him. He hung up the phone without another word, his hand falling to his side. He just stood there, motionless, on the sidewalk as people bustled past him, a world that was suddenly, terrifyingly alien and hostile. He had to walk away from his purchase, head down, feeling the weight of hundreds of gazes, real or imagined. He walked out into the bright sunlight, which suddenly seemed too harsh, too revealing. The Mercedes, parked in the front row, was no longer a symbol of power. It was a gleaming metal cage that would soon be taken from him. He got into the driver's seat, the same seat where he had lectured me about my spending, and he finally understood the crushing, absolute truth. He had never had money. He had only ever had access to mine. And I had just changed the password. While all this was happening, I was sitting in a small, sunny cafe miles away, in a part of the city he would never think to look for me. I had just bought a coffee and a croissant with a new debit card that Mr. Albright had arranged to have messengered to my hotel that morning. A card with my name, Eleanor Jenkins, and only my name, on it. The transaction was approved in a second. It was a small thing, buying a $5 coffee, but it felt monumental. It was the first purchase I had made as a free woman. I didn't feel a surge of triumph or vengeful joy. What I felt was a deep, overwhelming calm. It was the calm of justice, the serenity of a world that had been tilted on its axis for 12 years finally righting itself. I reached into my purse and took out the 4 pieces of the credit card he had cut up. I placed them on the table next to my coffee cup. They weren't fragments of a humiliation anymore. They were the pieces of a puzzle I had finally solved. They were the trophy of the most silent battle I had ever fought, and the most resounding victory I had ever felt. I sat there, looking at those broken pieces of plastic. They were no longer a symbol of my shame, they were the shattered remains of the cage I had just escaped. Justice hadn't come with a thunderclap. It came with the silence of a declined transaction and the quiet, irrefutable truth. If you're still listening, if my story has touched you in any way, please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below. That way, I'll know you gave me a like, and I'll know that you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me, it truly is. Please, comment the number 1, and then listen as I tell you the rest of my story. The first thing I did after that life-changing coffee was call a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best divorce lawyer in Chicago. Her name was Judith Hayes, a formidable woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for being a shark in a Chanel suit. I laid out the entire story for her with a composure that surprised even myself. No tears, no drama. Just the facts, the financial control, the emotional abuse, the blatant affair with my stepsister, and the final decision to execute Protocol Zero. She listened without interruption, occasionally jotting down a note. When I finished, her response was as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Excellent, Eleanor. Your pre-action protocol was flawless. The prenuptial agreement we structured years ago is ironclad, and the ownership of your initial assets is meticulously documented. He has no legal claim. None whatsoever. His name is on nothing of value. I'll send the divorce papers to be drafted this afternoon. He won't know what hit him. Hanging up the phone felt like signing my own Declaration of Independence. Preston's fall was as swift as it was brutal. His first reaction, once the shock wore off, was not repentance, but narcissistic fury. My phone became a digital battlefield. I received an avalanche of texts and voicemails. I read a few before I couldn't take it anymore. They ranged from threats, "You'll regret this, Eleanor. I'll ruin your name. I'll tell everyone you're crazy," to pathetic, manipulative pleas, "Baby, I miss you. I was stupid. Please come home. We can fix this. Everything I did for you." I didn't respond to a single one. I created a filter that sent all his communications directly to a folder for Judith. Silencing him, the man whose voice had once dictated my entire existence, was my final act of power. His words were now just white noise, impotent echoes in a digital file I would never have to open. 2 days after his humiliation at the grocery store, a tow truck showed up in front of our building and took the Mercedes. Since the lease was in my name and linked to my accounts, the lack of payment was immediate. The doorman, a kind man named George, called to inform me with a tone of discreet solidarity. "The vehicle has been removed, Ms. Jenkins," he said, pointedly using my maiden name. Then came Cassidy. I received one final, venomous text from her before I blocked her number. "I can't believe you did this to him. You're a bitter old woman, and you ruined his life because you couldn't stand to see him happy with someone younger. I hope you're miserable and alone forever." It was clear that once the money was gone, so was her loyalty. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and it had crashed and burned. The final, pathetic blow was the Rolex. A friend from my old life, one of the few who reached out to support me, told me she'd seen Preston in one of those second-hand luxury shops on Oak Street, haggling over the price of the watch, his ultimate symbol of success. He was selling it for a fraction of its value, just to have some cash in his pocket. The armor of his stolen status was being ripped from him, piece by piece, exposing the weak, mediocre man he had always been underneath. While Preston's world was imploding, I was quietly building a new one. I knew I couldn't stay in Chicago, a city filled with ghosts and painful memories. I needed a clean slate, a place where no one knew me as Preston Vance's wife. After consulting with Mr. Albright about my finances, my real, unencumbered finances, I bought a small condominium, with cash, in a quiet coastal town in North Carolina. It wasn't a penthouse. It had 2 bedrooms, a small balcony overlooking a salt marsh, and it got the most beautiful morning sun. The process of starting over was slow, and at times, incredibly lonely. I had spent 12 years as one half of a couple. Learning to be a one again was daunting. The first few weeks, the silence in my new apartment was deafening. I remember the first night, sitting on the floor eating takeout from a carton because I didn't have any furniture yet, and bursting into tears. Not because I missed him, but because I was terrified. What if I had made a huge mistake? But the feeling passed. I went for long walks on the beach, letting the salt air and the sound of the waves wash over me. I bought a bicycle and explored my new town. Instead of buying expensive art to fill the walls, I bought plants. I learned their names: fiddle leaf fig, snake plant, monstera. I learned how much water they needed, where to place them to catch the light. Tending to them, watching them grow and thrive under my care, felt like I was tending to the bruised, neglected parts of my own soul. I bought books, hundreds of them, and filled shelves with stories I'd always wanted to read. I bought a real espresso machine and spent a whole weekend learning how to make the perfect latte. Slowly, my small apartment began to feel like a home. Not a stage set designed to impress others, but a sanctuary, a place that was truly and completely mine. For the first time in years, I felt a peace no amount of money could ever buy. I knew I needed more than just a quiet life, I needed a purpose again. I saw a flyer in a coffee shop for a local nonprofit called Second Chapter, which mentored women over 40 who wanted to start their own small businesses. I volunteered, at first just helping with administrative tasks. But one day, I was listening to a young woman present her business plan for a small bakery. She was passionate and talented, but I saw the flaws in her financial projections immediately. After the meeting, I gently offered some advice, drawing on my old knowledge of spreadsheets and market analysis. The director of the organization, a wonderful woman named Maria, was impressed. She asked me to run a workshop on financial literacy. Then another on business planning. Soon, I was on their board, using my experience, my real experience, to help other women find their own independence, to write their own second chapters. It was more rewarding than any deal Preston had ever claimed to close. It was real. The divorce process was, as Judith had predicted, clinical and unilateral. Preston, having scraped together enough money to hire a second-rate lawyer, initially tried to argue that he was entitled to half of the marital assets. His claim was that he had been the driving force behind the growth of our fortune, that his financial management was a key contribution that entitled him to a massive settlement. He even tried to claim that my recent promotion to the board of the nonprofit was something he had inspired. It was a short, bloody battle for him. Judith was magnificent. She didn't just counter his claims, she annihilated them. In a single, devastating legal filing, she presented a mountain of evidence. Bank statements from before our marriage, proving that 99% of our fortune was pre-existing. A clear paper trail showing the trust funds and investment accounts were solely in my name, with him only ever listed as an authorized user. She even had the foresight to depose the partners from my old tech firm, who provided sworn affidavits testifying that Preston Vance had absolutely no involvement in, or knowledge of, the creation of my initial wealth. The final hearing wasn't in a courtroom, but in a sterile conference room in Judith's office building. I was there with Judith. Preston was there with his lawyer. He looked smaller, somehow. The designer suit hung on him, and the arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a sullen, defeated slump. He wouldn't look at me. His lawyer, seeing the hopeless situation, advised him to accept the settlement we offered. And the settlement was simple. I didn't ask him for anything. I didn't want a single dollar back from him. I just wanted him gone from my life, a clean break. He would walk away with his personal belongings, his clothes, his books, and nothing else. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the papers. Then, with a shaking hand, he signed his name. The great entrepreneur, the self-made man, was nothing more than a long-term tenant whose lease had finally expired. He stood up, pushed his chair in, and walked out of the room without a word. That was the last time I ever saw him. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, an email slipped through my spam filter. The subject line was just my name, Eleanor. My heart gave a little jump, a phantom limb of an old fear. It was from Preston. I almost deleted it without reading, but a morbid curiosity made me open it. It wasn't furious or threatening. It was, in its own way, far more disturbing. It was pathetic. It read, "I hope you're happy. I'm living in a terrible apartment. I lost all my friends. I don't understand how you could do this to me. I gave you everything. I gave you a life." That single sentence struck me, not with pain, but with a final, blinding clarity. He truly believed it. In his twisted, narcissistic reality, the charisma he projected, the social life he orchestrated, the confidence he exuded, these were tangible contributions, so valuable they equaled the fortune I had built with my own mind and my own risk. He had never seen my money as ours, but as fuel for his show. And he had never seen me as his partner, but as his silent, grateful sponsor. He wasn't a monster. He was just a hollow man, terrified of his own insignificance. I thought about replying. I thought about laying out the truth, point by point. But what was the point? There was no common ground, no shared reality to argue over. We had been living in two different universes all along. I dragged the email to the trash folder. I clicked empty trash. And I felt the last, invisible thread connecting me to him break forever. There was nothing left but silence. A few weeks later, I was unpacking one of the last boxes of things from my old life, photos and keepsakes I'd had shipped from Chicago. Inside, at the bottom of a box of old college textbooks, I found a small envelope. It contained the 4 pieces of the credit card. I placed them on the palm of my hand and looked at them in the warm sunlight streaming through the window of my new home. I didn't see the humiliation or the rage of that night anymore. I saw the catalyst. I saw the exact moment the woman I had been was forced to die so the woman I was meant to be could finally be born. I didn't throw them away. I went to my desk, where I now worked on plans for my nonprofit, and I put them in a small, carved wooden box. Not as a trophy of vengeance, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes, to rebuild yourself completely, you first have to let yourself be broken into pieces. So, here I am today. My life is quiet, and it is completely, utterly mine. I work with my nonprofit, and I find an incredible, profound joy in it. I watch women who came to us, broken and afraid, blossom into confident business owners. I see myself in them, and they see themselves in me. We are a community of survivors, of builders. On weekends, instead of going to loud, pointless parties, I kayak in the salt marshes, watching the egrets and herons. I read on my balcony, a cup of coffee in my hand, with no sound but the wind and the birds. I have friends, real friends, from my book club and my volunteer work. We talk about real things. We laugh until our sides hurt. I haven't seen Preston again, and his name is just a whisper from a book I read a long time ago, a character whose motivations I no longer try to understand. I don't feel hatred for him. I don't even feel pity. I feel a strange sense of gratitude for the brutal lesson he forced me to learn. My value was never printed on a piece of plastic. It was never in a penthouse apartment or in the approval of others. It was always inside me, buried under years of doubt and fear, waiting silently for me to have the courage to reclaim it. The most painful and liberating lesson I've learned is this: no one can make you feel small without your consent. The power others wield over you is ultimately a power you have lent them. It's a loan. And the most beautiful thing is that you can always call that loan in. True strength doesn't scream. It doesn't need to break things or humiliate others to prove its existence. True strength is an email sent in the stillness of the night. It is a small suitcase packed with deliberation. It is the silence on the other end of the line when someone's world collapses. For years, I confused Preston's aggression with strength, and my quietness with weakness. How profoundly wrong I was. And freedom, real freedom, isn't having a limitless bank account. That's just wealth. True freedom is waking up in the morning in a place that feels like your home, drinking a coffee you brewed yourself, and knowing that every decision of the day, big or small, belongs entirely to you. It's the freedom to simply be. That is a fortune that cannot be bought, and thankfully, it cannot be stolen. If you're out there, listening to this, and you're in a situation where you feel invisible, where your voice has been silenced and your value is constantly questioned, I want you to know something. I see you. I know that silence can feel like surrender, but it is often the very space where the most important revolutions are conceived. Your story is not over. Perhaps, like mine, it is just waiting for the right catalyst to truly begin. The story I've told you isn't really about a husband cutting up a credit card. It's about a woman who remembered that she was the bank, the source, the power itself. My name is Eleanor, and I had to lose everything he thought he had given me to find the one thing that truly mattered, myself. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. If any of this resonated, if you've ever felt underestimated or had to fight to reclaim your own voice, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's create a space here where every story is heard and every voice is valued. You are not alone. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, because every story of resilience we share is a reminder that no matter how broken we feel, we always have the power to rebuild.